The Accieri man spoke once again, in perfect Gnostic. I suppose I should introduce myself, while we wait for a reasonable conclusion, yes? I am Herzig Usurai, master of House Usurai, and one of Ekroth's prime councilmen. I have come here to take what is mine, and I would like to express my appreciation at your non-involvement. You'll be compensated properly, trust me. The golden-haired woman now suddenly spoke. Trust you? You Mochieri have no sense of honesty or honor. Why would I trust a word you say? Elias turned to her with shock and fear before hearing something he didn't expect. A laugh. A genuine laugh from the Ekrothi lord. Well, you'll have to just take my dishonest and honorless word now, won't you, Thalasi? As the last letter fell off of Uzurai's tongue, a shout could be heard from the distance. Elias looked over and could see, very visibly, the merchant that hired them being dragged along by a heavily armored Ekrothi soldier with a firm grip on his leg. The merchant was yelping and shouting as he flailed his doughy arms fruitlessly. Herzig smiled widely and spoke in an uncomfortably pleasant tone. I do hope you didn't harm him. I wouldn't want to soil my reputation with my good friend and business partner, now would I? Besides, we've business to discuss, don't we, John? He gave the merchant a pat on the cheek before turning to Elias and the Accieri woman. Don't go anywhere, will you? I work for both of you. Elias heard these words and held his position despite the fact that every muscle in his body was screaming for him to run. He stood and he watched. The Ekrothi lord nodded to him with a grin and returned his gaze to the flailing tradesman. This monster is going to kill me and steal my soul. So, Jan, I've a question for you. Herzig dropped to a knee next to the prone and exhausted man. Jan's eyes were fixed upon Lord Usurai and filled with terror. The lord met his gaze, his eyes filled with cruelty, and his face showing apparent irritation. Yes, I see in your eyes that you know what the question is going to be. However, I will ask it anyway. Herzig stood, adjusting his gauntlet, his eyes never leaving the prone merchant, and his voice dropped into a menacing hiss. Where is the orb? We did have an agreement, after all, and if memory serves, and it always does, the proper meeting point was Ravelswood, which you passed some time ago. So, with all that in mind, I can only assume that you are going back on our agreement. Is this true, Jan? The merchant sputtered out a flurry of words. I sold it to a collector in Demerol. He was offering a hefty sum for such a thing. How much? 20,000. The merchant screamed as Herzig drove his boot into his hand. 8,000! 8,000! Lord Usurai narrowed his eyes, and his lips curled up in building fury. I offered you triple that, you bloated sack of wasted meat! I trusted you with a simple trade, and instead you betray me. Go, Marasi! Every single syllable was biting, spiteful, and as sharp as a serpent's fang. The traitor stared at Herzig for several moments, his lips quivering, before suddenly he seemed to find an ounce of courage, or possibly stupidity. I'd trust my life with a house cat more than I would a sharp-eared fiend such as yourself. I bet you would have sinister plans with that orb. You would take your stupid rhetoric and weird eyes back to your god's forsaken land and shove your plans up your... Who did you sell it to? Give me a name, Jan, or you will spend the last several moments of your fetid little life in agony, choking on your own lies." The Acrothi's words were delivered more like a promise than a threat. The merchant lay defiant, his left hand pinned to the ground by a jagged boot and his mouth held shut by spite, or perhaps pride. Herzig sighed, reaching down and grabbing the merchant's quivering jaw with an armored gauntlet. He looked Jan directly in the eyes, and a resonating crack could be heard. The Acrothi lord broke the merchant's jaw with a single motion, and the jaw now seemed to hang helplessly from flesh, skin, and muscle. The merchant began to scream, but it was muffled by Herzig's other hand, which, with inhuman speed, darted into the man's open mouth. Elias looked at the golden-haired woman. She was looking away. He thought he should do the same, but his curiosity got the better of him. A wet snap could be heard, and Elias looked back to see the jagged lord with a fistful of muscle, and their contractor with blood flowing freely from his screaming mouth. In an equally swift motion, Lord Uzurai forced the muscle down Jan's throat. The merchant let out an agonized gurgle as he began to paw fruitlessly at his face with his unbroken right hand. Elias felt bile rising at the sight, but did his best to repress it. He mustn't show weakness to these fiends. He watched as Herzig Uzurai rose to his feet, observing the flailing merchant for a moment before turning to him and the golden-haired Acchieri with a wide smile. His yellow eyes were piercing into them once more. It seemed as though he was studying them, despite the fact that it was rather clear that he had his coming words planned. "So, on to the task at hand," the Lord finally said, his piercing yellow eyes darting between the two. "If you heard any of the prior conversation, it would be clear that there is a missing something that I want." He took a couple of steps towards them, wiping his gauntlet that made contact with the merchant's tongue of blood and mucus. "Now, it should be clear that I can't just walk into Demeril and take what I want. The stupid Gormarasi, meaning your kind," he gestured to Elias, "would not allow me even within a certain distance of the gates. These newer kingdoms seem to be built on a foundation of, xenophobia. Stupid creatures." Herzig's gaze seemed to trail off elsewhere for a moment. "So you, what, want us to fetch it for you?" The golden-haired woman spoke up. Lord Uzurai's gaze snapped back to meet the eyes of the Acchieri woman with a grin. "Why, yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. By what means are entirely up to you, and, as a show of goodwill..." Herzig raised a hand, and made a small gesture with his index and middle fingers as one of his soldiers approached with 2 jingling bags. He took them both in his clean gauntlet and held them out to the 2 mercenaries. 10,000 crowns each. Plenty to bribe, if need be. The orb I seek is a pale green orb of surprisingly standard make. It has a few markings upon it, but it is perpetually warm to the touch. You will know you have the proper object if there is a peculiar glow when you touch it." Elias and the Acchieri woman took their respective bags with shock and surprise. The young human opened up his bag just to be certain he wasn't being lied to, and, much to his surprise, he was not. The bag was filled entirely with glistening crowns, their silver surfaces reflecting the moon's pale light. He removed a single coin just to be sure, rolling it around in his hand, feeling it against his skin. It was cold from the bite of the night, but it was real. He looked up at the Acrothi lord, filled with shock and terror. Thank you." Herzig scowled and laughed in a bitter and dismissive manner. "Thanking me for payment for a task you ought to do? What are you, a beaten and abused animal, unused to the taste of success? Pathetic. Go. Get what I want. And you can keep your meager scraps. Go, go. He began to turn, waving an armored hand dismissively. The voice of the golden-haired woman broke the short silence, defiant and pointed. There's more to this. What are you hiding? What's the catch? You Akrathi are infamous for your serpentine tongues. Lord Uzurai, at the suggestion of such a thing, spun on his heel to face her, and took 3 intimidating steps forward, interrupting her defiant question with the clatter of jagged metal and steady, scrutinizing eye contact. His eyes like dying stars boring into her soul. Do I look like a Calithi swine to you? Do I look like I hold a net and hook, waiting to drag you away to be personal property? He paused as his eyes slowly looked her up and down. Yes, you would fetch quite the price in Akrath. But we of the Uzurai blood value our word and our coin. He straightened himself out, seeming to calm himself down. There is no catch. You're retrieving something that I want very much, and I am paying you for your time and your services. He cocked his head at her, and quickly glanced at Elias through the corner of his eye. Now, you've been paid. Go. Do this. I am patient, but do not try to run away with my money. I will find you. Elias felt as though he couldn't breathe as he watched the Achiari with the golden hair stand defiantly, face to face with the imposing Akrathi lord. Several long moments passed before finally the woman responded. Very well, Uzurai. You have a deal. After all, you've put us in no proper position to say no. An uncomfortably friendly smile spread across Herzog's face. Excellent. A deal it is. I've an agent in Demeril, an alchemist. His name is Holgon Gastov. Dark hair, beard. The Akrathi lord pulled an amulet that was hidden under his breastplate with a slashed eye engraved upon it, much like his crown. He should be in possession of a ring, or some other form of paraphernalia with my house's sigil upon it. Should be obvious. Look for the slashed eye. Elias raised a shaking eyebrow. Where is his shop? Is it within the city limits, or... His words came out with a terrified quiver. Herzog gave him a small shrug, seeming to disregard the young man's apparent fear entirely. He changes buildings, sometimes operates out of a wagon. Use your problem-solving skills. Figure it out. He pointed a patronizing finger to Elias's forehead. We're done. Go. Elias and the nameless woman looked at each other, and back at Herzog. The young human gave a nod and started on the road back to Sutherhall, the sharp-eared woman following suit. Elias looked over to meet the eyes of the Achiari woman, which he just saw now, were bright green. I suppose we're going to be comrades in arms for a short time. His newfound companion simply nodded, and turned to fix her gaze forward, as the 2 situational allies walked down the forsaken roadway, back the way they came.